Hey guys, today's story is a little different. It's not about a cheating spouse or a backstabbing friend. It's about something that cuts deeper than either of those. It's about being overlooked, dismissed, erased by the very people who raised you. My name's Bean, I'm 38 now, and I run a private industrial design firm that clears 7 figures annually. But back then when all this began, I wasn't the entrepreneur, or the inventor, or even the son. I was just the family screw-up. You ever walk into a room and feel like you've already disappointed everyone inside it? That was my childhood. I was the middle kid, quiet, awkward, bookish. Obsessed with building little machines out of junk. My older sister? Star athlete, honor student, pre-med by 16. My younger brother? Charming, outgoing, always the center of attention. If he skipped school, it was, boys will be boys. If I skipped school, it was, Bean, you're wasting your life. Our family wasn't abusive. Just strategic with its affections. Praise was currency. And I was bankrupt. One time, I built a small mechanical hand that could pick up objects. I was 11. Showed it to my dad, hopeful. He glanced at it and muttered, "Try not to set the house on fire." That wasn't disappointment. That was dismissal. And it sunk in. They weren't going to applaud effort, only results. Their kind of results. So I stopped performing for applause. I taught myself CD design in high school, stayed up nights watching engineering tutorials, soldering circuits under a desk lamp. Every dollar I earned went to buying parts. I worked warehouse night shifts and tutored math during the day. I didn't have much of a social life. But I did have a dream: build something that mattered. And do it without asking for permission. At 21, I released a prototype for an ergonomic industrial clamp. It was small, ugly, and it sold out online in 2 weeks. I reinvested everything. Bought better tools, hired a freelance patent attorney, and submitted the designs. By 25, my name was quietly listed on 3 approved patents. I remember telling my mom about one over dinner. She stirred her soup and asked if I was still with that artsy girl. That night, I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I could ever build something impressive enough to make her look up from her food. But the answer was already clear. Then came the anniversary party. It was my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, an extravagant reunion with a banquet hall, a jazz trio, and more cousins than I remembered existing. Everyone had flown in. Everyone was glowing. Everyone but me. I wore a clean button-down, but somehow still felt underdressed in that room of doctors, lawyers, and published authors. Half the family didn't even recognize me. I was the shadow in the corner. Until my father stood up. He raised his glass, surveying the room like a king addressing his court. "I just want to say how proud I am," he announced. "We've raised some real shining stars here, our attorney, our surgeon, our music producer. You're our legacy." I waited. For a glance. A nod. A mention. But my name never came. He sat down to applause. I didn't move. My sister leaned over, smiled softly, and whispered, "Don't take it personally. You know how he is." I smiled back, but inside I snapped. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. That night, I drove home in silence. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel. I didn't play music. Didn't call anyone. When I got home, I walked straight to the back of my house into the workshop that nobody in my family had ever visited. I flicked on the light. On the wall was a locked cabinet. Inside was a folder labeled Vault. I opened it. Inside were 4 working prototypes, 2 exclusive licensing contracts, and a signed letter of intent from a Fortune 100 company to acquire my tech for 7 figures, contingent on a demo. The deal had been quietly brewing for 6 months. I hadn't told anyone. Not out of secrecy, but because I already knew they wouldn't have cared. But now I cared. And I realized something cold and liberating. I didn't need their recognition. I needed one moment. One strike. One reveal. Not to get even, but to end it. But before I go any further, before I tell you how the toast turned to thunder, do me a favor. Like this video and subscribe. But only if you believe betrayal always circles back around. And tell me where you're watching from. Drop a comment. Have you ever been erased by your own blood? Now sit back, let the room go quiet, and let me tell you how it really went down. I moved back in with my parents at 21 with nothing but a duffel bag and a plan they'd never care to understand. The room they gave me was the one I'd grown up in, but it felt smaller now, like the air in it had thinned from all the years I'd spent suffocating under their expectations. On the surface, it looked the same, the faded soccer trophy from 8th grade still on the shelf, the posters of music I no longer listened to curling at the corners. But inside, I was no longer the same boy they had labeled the family screw-up. They didn't say it to my face, of course. They never had to. It was in the way they introduced me to relatives, always with a disclaimer. This is Jason. He's figuring things out. That phrase. Like I was some broken GPS trying to lock onto a signal everyone else had been born with. My siblings, 2 overachieving corporate prodigies, were already married, with homes that looked like catalog spreads. Family gatherings were nothing more than high-performance reviews where I'd be quietly reminded that I hadn't made it. But I wasn't idle. Every night, while the rest of the house went dark, I buried myself in code. I had learned to program while working graveyard shifts and odd jobs, teaching myself until my fingers danced across the keyboard like they belonged there. My startup was small, laughably small, just me, an old laptop, and a dream I refused to say out loud. Not after years of being the family's punchline. One evening, during a particularly tense dinner, my father brought up my brother's recent promotion. VP at 32. Now that's how you do it. I didn't speak. I just kept cutting into my overcooked chicken, because if I opened my mouth, I wasn't sure what would come out. I was proud of my brother, had worked hard, but the way Dad weaponized success left bruises you couldn't see. Later that night, I found myself staring at the screen, watching lines of code turn into something real. A platform I was building quietly, steadily designed to streamline contractor payments and gig work compliance. It was technical, boring to most, but it solved a real problem. I had just signed 2 pilot contracts, small businesses, but they trusted me enough to let me try. Still, I didn't mention it to my parents. What was the point? In their eyes, I was still the kid who flunked pre-calc and wrecked Mom's Honda. The following week, Mom caught me working in the kitchen at 2 a.m. and didn't ask what I was doing. She just sighed and muttered, "You should really get some sleep. Maybe apply to Amazon again." Her voice wasn't cruel. Just tired. Resigned. Like she'd already filed me under disappointment and didn't have the energy to reevaluate. I closed the laptop and went to bed, teeth grinding against every syllable. A month later, the platform hit its first milestone, 1,000 users. I stared at the analytics dashboard until my eyes blurred, unsure whether to feel joy or panic. I couldn't celebrate it openly, not in this house. So I opened a bottle of root beer, sat on the front porch, and toasted the moon in silence. Sometimes revenge doesn't look like rage. Sometimes it's just quiet progress done in the shadows, away from those who'd rather see you fail. Then it happened. I got the email. A mid-sized agency out of Dallas wanted to license my platform. The deal wasn't huge, but it was enough. Enough to rent my own place. Enough to quit the night job. Enough to prove to myself, if no one else, that I was building something worth noticing. But when I told my parents, hoping for even a sliver of pride, my father just said, "That's nice. Just be careful not to blow it this time." I didn't answer. Just nodded and left the table. But inside, something crystallized. This wasn't about validation anymore. This was about endurance. About holding on long enough to build something so undeniable, even they couldn't ignore it. Back in my room that night, I looked around at the posters, the trophy, the walls that had watched me grow and grieve. And I knew I wasn't staying much longer. They had no idea what I was building. But soon the world would. And the family screw up? He'd rewrite that label line by line, code by code until even they couldn't recognize who he'd become. The first check cleared 2 days later. I remember just staring at the bank app on my phone, the zeros lined up like a challenge. It wasn't some wild overnight success, it was mid-5 figures, but to me, it was freedom. I walked into the kitchen that morning like I had a secret under my skin. My mom was watering her orchids. My dad was sipping his bitter coffee, scanning the news like he ran it. I poured myself some cereal and didn't say a word. Not yet. I wanted the silence. I wanted it to thicken, to make room for the weight of what was coming. I gave my 2 weeks at the warehouse that afternoon. My boss didn't believe me at first. "You got something better?" he asked, more out of habit than curiosity. I just smiled and said, "Yeah. I built something." And that's when it started to feel real. I had built something. From a cracked screen laptop and borrowed Wi-Fi. From rejection and frustration and every moment they told me I couldn't. By the end of that month, the platform had 2 more clients. Then 4. Then a corporate account that wanted to white label it. I worked 20-hour days, sometimes forgetting to eat, but I didn't care. I was hungry for something deeper than food. I was proving something mostly to myself. The code became cleaner. The design sharper. I even hired a contractor, my first employee, to help scale. He lived 2 states away and didn't know my past. Just knew I paid fast and respected the work. It felt good to be seen for what I did, not who they thought I was. Back home, things didn't change. My parents didn't ask questions. They thought I was just freelancing. That suited me fine. Every quiet dinner, every offhand, "When are you going to do something real?" fueled me. I wanted the disbelief. I needed it like flint needs steel. Then came the day I moved out. I didn't say anything big. Just packed my bags into a car they didn't know I bought and said I'd found a rental closer to the city. My mom gave a quick hug. My dad just nodded. "Hope this one sticks," he said, not looking up from his paper. That one hit harder than I expected. Not because I needed his blessing, but because part of me still wished he wanted to give it. I shut the door behind me and didn't look back. The new place was small but mine. A shoebox apartment with a leaky faucet and a view of the alley. But it was independence. I could breathe. I set up a workspace in the corner with a second monitor, a whiteboard, and a corkboard full of user feedback. The platform had crossed 10,000 users. Reviews were pouring in. Contractors finally felt like someone had built something just for them, and they were right. I had. Every late night, every line of logic was crafted for people like me, who had once been invisible. That's when the local paper picked it up. A tech columnist had found the platform and done a write-up. Local startup simplifies freelance compliance. I clipped the article and stuck it to the fridge. My fridge. My name in ink. Not that my parents noticed. I never heard from them that week. Or the next. But things kept moving. Fast. A VC firm reached out. Then another. I wasn't chasing them anymore, they were chasing me. I hired a small team. A UI designer, a marketing guy, a part-time legal advisor. We had Slack channels and Zoom calls and late-night brainstorms. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to catch up. I was leading. One afternoon, I got a group text from the family chat. Someone had posted a picture from a cousin's engagement party I hadn't been invited to. No one noticed I wasn't in the photo. No one asked? That was the moment I stopped caring. Not in a bitter, burn bridge way, but in a clean, final kind of way. I realized I didn't need to be included to belong. I was building my own world now. Then something wild happened. The National Syndicate picked up the original article. Suddenly, I was getting LinkedIn requests from people I hadn't spoken to in years. An old teacher messaged me. "Didn't expect you to be the one to make it." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. I wasn't angry. Just vindicated. And more than anything, I felt peaceful. Because for the first time, I wasn't chasing anyone's approval. I had passed their expectations, then lapped them. That night, I sat alone in the apartment and opened a bottle of something cold. The city buzzed outside my window. And I remembered all the nights I had worked in silence, with nothing but a screen and the echo of my father's disapproval. I raised my glass, not in spite but in full, quiet triumph. Not all revenge comes with fireworks. Sometimes it's just the steady rise of something no one saw coming. I thought I knew what quiet revenge looked like, but nothing prepared me for the silence that followed when my name hit national news. A feature segment ran on a morning show. How one underdog built a compliance tech empire from his kitchen table. There were cutaways of my home office, stock photos of digital freelancers, and a narration that framed me as the kid who rose from family indifference to disrupt an industry. I didn't even know they'd filmed it until my email exploded and my server strained under the traffic surge. I was still in my sweats, sipping half-warm coffee, when my phone started blowing up. Numbers I didn't recognize. Some I did. An old classmate from high school texted, "Dude, is that you on NBC?" Then came the LinkedIn messages. Recruiters. Journalists. And tucked in between them, me sister. She wrote, "Dad saw the interview. He hasn't said a word since." I read it 3 times. Smiled. Not because it hurt him, but because he finally had to see me. Not the screw-up. Not the burden. Me. That night, I sat with a decision. For years, I'd let the distance grow. Let them assume I was drifting or failing. But now, with every headline, I could feel their version of me collapsing under the weight of reality. So, I planned something. Not a confrontation. A demonstration. I bought a domain, thescrewup.com. Just that. 1 page. It had a loop gif of me clinking a glass of champagne with a line under it. From the family disappointment to founder, CEO, and problem solver. Underneath, 3 press links, my company's site, and nothing else. No ads. No comments. Just clarity. I sent it in the family group chat. No caption. No explanation. Just a link. 5 minutes. No response. An hour. Then my cousin Hode never bothered with me unless it was to ask if I still needed a job, sent back a thumbs up. That was it. But behind that one emoji, I knew it had landed. A few days later, my mom called. It was late, nearly 11 p.m. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was short. "We saw everything. I didn't know you were doing all that. Just wanted you to know." Her voice cracked on the last line. I didn't call back. Not right away. Because I wasn't sure what they wanted to say or what I wanted to hear. For years, I had wanted an apology. For the silence. For the labels. For not being believed in. But when success comes, the apologies start to feel unnecessary. You don't want their guilt. You want their absence to stay honest. Clean. That week, the investors I had turned down started sending "just checking in" emails. One of them even tried to pitch me a new idea. I politely declined. I wasn't building a circle, I was building a fortress. I wanted every brick made of proof. Not revenge in the vengeful sense. Revenge in the record-keeping sense. Quiet. Documented. Undeniable. And then, the family reunion invite came. A Facebook event. The same kind they'd made for years without tagging me. This time, I was tagged. "Hope to see you there," read the caption from my aunt. I stared at it for a long time. The pettier version of me considered RSVPing, maybe, just to twist the knife. But I did something better. I said yes. Not to be the bigger person, but to be the final version of myself they'd never been ready to meet. When I walked into that rental hall in July, heads turned like I was a stranger. I was dressed well, clean-cut, no longer the kid who sulked in corners. I didn't announce anything. Didn't demand attention. I just moved through the room with the kind of calm you only earn by surviving every version of their doubt. My dad stood near the buffet table, holding a plate of potato salad like it was a shield. He saw me. And for a moment, he froze. Then came the words I didn't expect. "I saw the interviews," he said. "You did good." Just that. No warmth. But no venom either. I nodded. "Thanks." It wasn't a hug. It wasn't closure. But it was the sound of stones shifting. Later that evening, someone tapped a glass and asked everyone to raise a toast to family success. And I saw my dad raise his glass just a little. His eyes didn't meet mine. But they didn't need to. Because the next words came from me. "I'd like to toast one more thing," I said, my voice steady. "To the forgotten ones. The underestimated. The ones who carry silence like armor until the world finally hears them. This one's for us." And I raised my glass to the ceiling like I was saluting a ghost. The room went still. I saw my cousin lower his eyes. My uncle clear his throat. And my father just stood there. That was my moment. Not loud. Not cruel. Just a steady, full-circle fire burning quietly behind my ribs. After the reunion, I didn't expect much to change. I thought it would be a brief ripple, a single quiet toast that passed through the family like a tremor and was forgotten the next morning. But I was wrong. The next few weeks turned into a parade of subtle reckonings. Calls I'd never gotten before. Messages not just of curiosity, but admiration. Relatives who had once spoken to me like I was an afterthought now asked questions like I was a keynote speaker at a family conference. "So how did you know that market would explode? What's your day look like now? Think you could talk to my son about his startup idea?" The irony wasn't lost on me. But not all attention feels like respect. Some of it is just hunger dressed up in flattery. My inbox filled with pitches. My cousin sent a deck for a crypto farming platform he barely understood. An uncle asked if I'd invest in his organic beard oil business. I declined them all, politely but firmly. I wasn't the family ATM. I hadn't worked my way to success to become a convenience. What I did do was start something quieter, more powerful, a scholarship fund. Anonymous. Meant for kids like I was written off, ignored, told their dreams weren't realistic. The application didn't even require a GPA. Just a story. I called it the Screw-Ups Grant. And I didn't tell a soul in my family. I started receiving submissions within a month. And reading those letters, it felt like looking into 100 different mirrors. Kids who'd been called failures before they even had a chance. One girl wrote, "My uncle told me people like me flip burgers, not write code. I'm still learning JavaScript on a cracked Chromebook." I gave her the grant. and sent her a laptop. No press release. Just quiet justice. Meanwhile, my father tried to re-enter the edges of my life in small, clumsy ways. He forwarded me articles about leadership. Sent me a YouTube video titled, "Fathers Who Regret Pushing Their Sons Away." Subtle, heavy-handed attempts at apology without ever saying the words. One evening, he sent a message that read, "Your mom told me you're doing something with scholarships." That's good. Just that. No punctuation. I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, but because I knew what that silence meant. It meant he saw me. And it hurt. The press kept coming. A podcast host asked if I'd ever been underestimated in life. I laughed. Define underestimated. I told a soft version of the truth. About growing up in a house where belief was rationed out like oxygen. About being called a waste of potential before I even had time to fail. The host went quiet. Then said, "Wow. So, was your success the revenge?" I didn't answer right away. Because the truth is, no. Revenge wasn't the success. Revenge was the control I took back. Revenge was in how I chose not to become bitter, not to become the story they wrote for me. It was in every moment I didn't explode when I wanted to. In every quiet decision I made that echoed louder than any shout. But not everything stayed quiet. One morning, I got a call from a major publication. They were doing a feature on entrepreneurs who came from dysfunctional families. I almost said no. I didn't want to turn my story into clickbait. But then they said, "We want to focus on healing through leadership. On what people carry and how they repurpose it." That changed things. So I agreed. The article came out a month later. From disowned to disruptor, the tech CEO who refused to stay in his lane. They used a photo I didn't love mid-sentence, slightly blurry, but the story landed. It wasn't just about business. It was about being underestimated, overlooked, and still choosing not to disappear. That week, my sister called. We hadn't spoken in over a year. "I read the article," she said. "You didn't name us." "You could have, but you didn't." I didn't respond immediately. Then I said, "I wasn't telling on anyone. I was just telling the truth." She was quiet for a while. Then, "You know, Dad printed it. He keeps it in the garage. Like he doesn't want anyone to know he's proud, but he also can't throw it out." That hit harder than I expected. Because in that Imagine Me story folded and hidden among old tools I saw everything I ever needed to know. That sometimes, love doesn't look like hugs or apologies. Sometimes it's a folded article on a dusty shelf. Sometimes it's a man who never knew how to say sorry, trying in the only language he knows by holding on to the version of you he never let himself believe in. I ended that call with a long exhale. Not anger. Not even forgiveness. Just space. Space between who I had been and who I'd become. And the unspoken truth that maybe, just maybe, that space was finally being bridged not with words, but with silence that meant something new. The article didn't just echo through my family, it sent ripples beyond anything I anticipated. I started getting emails from strangers who saw themselves in my story. Former addicts who now led nonprofits. Ex-convicts turned mentors. Artists who'd been told their work was worthless, now selling out galleries. I replied to as many as I could, and each one reminded me that what I went through wasn't rare, it was just rarely acknowledged. And then came the speaking requests. At first, I declined most. I wasn't comfortable turning my pain into a staged performance. But one event caught my attention, a youth conference focused on second chances. They didn't want a CEO. They wanted someone who'd been told they were nothing and chose not to believe it. That I could do. When I stepped onto that stage, I looked out into the eyes of hundreds of kids who'd been through things far worse than I had. I told them what I wish someone had told me at 15. You are not your worst moment. And you are not someone else's limited imagination. That line ended up going viral. I never meant for it to, but it happened. Soon, it wasn't just an article, it was a clip, a quote, a movement of sorts. People shared their own screw-up stories with the hashtag. Not Your Worst Moment trended for 2 days. And amidst it all, something shifted. For the first time, my name wasn't tied to failure, but to resilience. Still, part of me wondered what my father made of it all. And then came the letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, no return address, just his handwriting. Inside, a single sheet. No, dear. No, love. Just one line. I saw the speech. I was wrong. No signature. No apology. But that was it. That was everything. I read it once. Then again. I didn't cry. I didn't frame it. I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer beside the article he'd hidden in the garage. It felt like closing a loop I hadn't realized was still open. A week later, my daughter asked me something that stopped me in my tracks. Dad, do you think you're still proving them wrong? The question hit deeper than I expected. I thought for a moment and replied, not anymore. I think now I'm just proving myself right. Because that was the evolution, wasn't it? Revenge, when it starts, is about them. About showing them, making them feel it. But healing real growth, that's when you stop needing their reaction at all. That's when the silence becomes power. That's when you no longer look back to see if they're watching. I didn't need the last word. I had the last move. And in that quiet space, I found something I hadn't realized I'd been missing: peace. So when the invitation came to the next family reunion, I didn't hesitate this time. I said yes. Not out of obligation, but because I was no longer afraid of the room. I no longer needed to stand at the edge, waiting to be acknowledged. I would walk in, fully myself, and let the silence greet me like an old friend. And when the moment came when my father saw me across the room, and his eyes met mine, I didn't look away. He didn't either. No grand hug. No emotional speech. Just a nod. A long, heavy, honest nod. That was our truce. That was enough. Later, as I sat with my daughter on the porch outside, she leaned into my shoulder and whispered, I'm glad you didn't stay mad forever. I looked at her, smiled, and said, Me too. Because the real revenge wasn't the toast. It wasn't the article, or the grants, or the speech. It was showing the next generation what healing looks like. What growth sounds like. What a man becomes when he stops chasing approval and starts walking in his truth. And in that moment, surrounded by the very family who once labeled me the failure, I realized something strange and beautiful. I didn't need their validation anymore, but I had it. I didn't need their applause, but I could hear it, soft and real. And I didn't need them to say, I'm proud, because I finally was. There's something unexplainably quiet about peace. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It doesn't kick open the door like anger or walk in loud like revenge. It just settles. Like dust after a storm. And that's how it felt, standing in the middle of the life I had built when I carved with callous hands, heavy silence, and relentless intention. Not to prove anyone wrong anymore, but to prove I had the power all along. Looking back, I don't resent the titles they gave mess, screw up, the disappointment, the lost cause. Those labels weren't a sentence. They were just the static I had to tune out to hear my own voice. And when I finally did, I found clarity no praise could match. I built something, not just companies or speeches or scholarships, but a legacy rooted in resilience, not revenge. My daughter will never hear, "You're not enough," from the people who should love her most. She'll know what it sounds like when someone listens instead of judges. When someone believes instead of mocks. That's the chain I've broken. That's the real inheritance. And if there's one thing I've learned through it all, it's this: revenge might light the fire, but peace is what keeps you warm. So here we are. Full circle. The family screw up, the black sheep, the invisible one walking out of the shadows, not to burn the past down but to walk past it, untouched, unbothered, and finally free. Not every story gets a ribbon-tied ending. But this one? It ends exactly where it should, with a man who no longer needs the world to clap, because he's learned to stand tall in the quiet.